Hey Garden Nerds, I'm Christy Wilhelmi and I'm sitting here with squash in my lap because I want to review today two basic terms that if you're a new gardener, you may not know what these are. You may have never even heard of them. It's the difference between perennials and annuals. Let's start with annuals because most vegetables in the garden that you are probably growing right now are annuals. An annual means that it lives out its life cycle in the season or in a year, but usually most annuals live 3 to 4 months-ish, and then they expire. That's just what they do. They either send up a flower stalk, set seed, and die, or the plant has made fruit along its vines, or its, tendrils, whatever, and then it dies. That's how annuals work. And you pull them out at the end of the season, and you replant new ones next year. As I said, most of the vegetables that you plan on growing in your garden, those are annuals. So let's start with the greens. Lettuces, mustard greens, arugula, and it's funny because I throw herbs like parsley and cilantro in there, although parsley is supposed to be a biennial, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Other greens like the kale and chard, but those are part of Brassicaceae, and Cucurbitaceae. But let's move on to Brassicaceae. That's your broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kohlrabi, Brussels sprouts, and kale. And there are some root vegetables in there too. But generally speaking, these crops live out their life cycle. They make the head, or they, make their leaves, and then they finish. Now, sometimes you can cut them down, leave the roots in the soil, and they'll start generating new growth. But typically, they make their big fruit, their big flower bud, and then they expire. The Cucurbitaceae family, so that's beets, chard, and spinach, and Auric mountain spinach, and a couple of other, the quinoa, things like that. Those also are like root vegetables, are one and done. Your carrots, parsnips, beets, turnips, radishes, they're one and done. You grow them, you pull them, you're done. They're not going to reseed themselves or multiply in the soil on their own. But Swiss chard is one of those vegetables that can live a lot longer than just a season. I have had chard live up to 1.5 years. I've also had some beans live for that long. Certain types of beans will live a long time if you let them, and if your winters are mild. Cucurbitaceaes, which are your squash, melons, and cucumbers, they are all annuals as well. They will start vining first, then male flowers will open, then the female flowers will open, those will pollinate one another, and then you get the fruit. And once the fruit ripens on the vine dies back, season's over. That's how that works. So those are examples of annual vegetables. Let's move on to perennials. Perennials are really great to have in your garden because you don't have to plant them year after year. They live season after season or year after year. Fruit trees fall into that category, as do a lot of berries like blueberries, blackberries, raspberries, loganberries, boysenberries, etc. Even strawberries, which I have here, can live for many, many years. Most people usually will pull out their strawberry plants after a couple of years and plant new, but I've actually kept these strawberry plants going for maybe up to 7 years because I have a trick that I do to revive them, but that's a different video for another day. Other perennial vegetables include things like asparagus, artichokes, rhubarb, and in some cases, in warm winter climates anyway, sweet potatoes become a perennial crop because even if you think you've gotten every single one of them out of the ground, there's always a root left behind and they germinate and turn into another year of sweet potatoes. But in a lot of places that get snow, sweet potatoes have to be sown year after year fresh. So they're treated as annuals there. The good thing about perennials, if I didn't already say this, is that they drive down deep roots, and so they don't need as much water or attention from you, and they're more hardy than most annuals are. So if you live in a climate where things are really tricky to grow, plant some perennial vegetables because they will outlast most of the annuals that are growing around. Now, Let's talk about the Solanaceae family, because Solanaceae toggles the line between annual and perennial. Technically, peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and tomatillos to some degree, and some ground cherries are technically perennials, meaning they will live year after year, they will produce year after year. However, in places where I live, we get blight and powdery mildew, so by the end of the season, those things are diseased and we end up pulling them out. We treat them as annuals, and those go in the compost bin or in the green bin for the city to process at a really high temperature. But if you don't have blight or diseases in your tomato, pepper, eggplants, those can be perennials. I have clients who have 5-year-old pepper plants. They're as tall as us, as both myself and my client, and they keep pumping out peppers. Eggplant, if you've grown eggplant and not had really good luck in the first year, leave it there. Second year eggplant is really great. And again, this is in warm winter climates where these plants will survive over winter. They won't die because there's no frost. And they will start, if you cut them back, and then they start to actually send out new leaves in like December or January, and then by spring they bump and they start producing like crazy. So this is a case where something that you might treat as an annual is technically a perennial, and if it works where you live, you can grow it that way. Other perennial vegetables include things like tree kale and tree collards. So they're something that will just keep growing taller and taller and taller. And sometimes kale will do that on its own, regular old kale. It's an annual kale, but it'll live for a long time. Again, I have a client who's had the same kale plant for 5 years, and it just keeps putting out leaves. You can do that if it works. Next, let's talk about herbs for a minute, because there are perennial herbs and annual herbs. As I mentioned already, cilantro and parsley in warm winter climates are considered annuals. Parsley is technically a biennial, meaning it will live for a year, but in the second year, it will start to bolt to seed, which means it will send up a flower stalk, set seed, and drop, and then it'll die. But where it gets hot, these herbs are strictly annuals. But thyme, oregano, sage, mint, these are perennials, and in some cases hardy perennials like rosemary and lavender, where they will be hardy and just keep growing bigger and bigger every year. And you wouldn't pull them out at the end of the season. So let's talk basil for a minute, because basil is an annual, but there are perennial varieties, like African basil, which gets about 5 feet in diameter, has purple flowers, and attracts bees all the time, and a few hybrid varieties like Pesto perpetua, I believe, is perennial basil, and there are variegated varieties of that as well. Basil is supposed to die, so I get a lot of comments or questions from clients who are like, my basil died. I'm like, it's December, it's supposed to. So treat basil as an annual, where you pull it out at the end of the season, and except for those perennial varieties, just prune those back and they'll come back next year. Start fresh each spring with new basil. When you go to the nursery, usually a plant tag will tell you whether something is an annual or a perennial, but thankfully we have the magic of the interwebs, which a quick search will solve if you don't see it on the plant tag. I think it's important to take annual and perennials into consideration when planning out your garden. I like to keep perennials along the edges so they're not in the way of wherever I want to plant my next season's crops. So for example, if I'm putting together an herb garden, I'll put the thyme, rosemary, chives, and sage in the corners. Those are my anchor plants that are going to stay there year round, and then I'll plant the middle with parsley and cilantro and whatever other herbs I might want to fill the space with. So that's a basic breakdown of the difference between annual and perennial. I hope this helps you understand it a little bit more, and that you'll be able to take this information straight out into the garden when you plant. If you like this video, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you find out when our next video comes online. Consider becoming a Patreon subscriber to support all the free stuff that we do here at Gardenerd, and of course, check out my books, Gardening for Geeks, Grow Your Own Mini Fruit Garden, and my new novel, Garden Variety. Happy gardening!